I will just say thank you, miss, unless you girls like to be called Ms.
Why don't you call me Mr.?
Beverly LaSalle wasn't the first female impersonator on television, but after years of TV treating drag performers as deranged psychopaths and literal punchlines, she was probably the first to be afforded dignity, love, and respect. Beverly was a recurring character on the show All in the Family, and she might embody the most remarkable drag transformation ever seen on TV. All aboard and welcome to Matt Baum's Culture Cruise. This time we're taking a deep dive on Beverly LaSalle, the groundbreaking female impersonator played by Laurie Shannon at a time when television didn't exactly give gender nonconformity a sympathetic treatment.
How dare you judge me?
All in the Family was a sitcom that ran for almost all of the 70s, focusing on the tension between the conservative parents, Edith and Archie Bunker, and the liberal youngsters, Gloria and Mike. And just a heads up, the show used some pretty frank language, and you're going to hear some homophobic slurs from the characters. Beverly first enters the Bunkers' lives in the episode Archie the Hero, which aired on September 29, 1975. Archie's been working nights as a cabbie, and he arrives home one morning to boast about having just saved someone's life. You see, that night he picked up a passenger who made quite an impression.
All of a sudden, this big, tall, beautiful-looking, classy dame hops into the cab.
After driving for about 15 minutes, Archie says, he realized that the woman had passed out, so he stopped the cab, jumped in the back, and...
Thinking quick, I start giving a mouth-to-mouth restitution there.
He gets the woman to a hospital, leaves his name and address, expecting her to look him up so she can pay her cab fare, and at the end of his shift, he drives home to brag. Edith, his wife, is beside herself.
Archie, you saved a human life!
Yeah.
You are a hero!
Yeah.
Oh.
Archie basks in Edith's admiration for a bit, and mentions that the owner of the cab company wants to call the local newspaper to tell them about what happened, and that's a detail to remember for later. He steps upstairs, and while he's away, guess who shows up?
Oh, I'm Beverly LaSalle. Is your husband home?
This is our first meeting with Beverly, the person Archie gave mouth-to-mouth to in the cab. She explains that she just passed out from exhaustion, which probably means she didn't even need the mouth-to-mouth, but whatever, and she wants to thank Archie personally. She mentions that she was exhausted because she'd been working a lot of shows lately.
Are you in show business?
Yes. I'm a female impersonator.
You know, that's smart, too. I mean, who can imitate a female better than a lady?
Edith's misunderstanding leads to even more misunderstandings. When Archie comes downstairs, Beverly offers to pay her cab fare with a $50.
Okay, I never say no to a lady.
Beverly gently tries to clear things up.
I'm no lady.
How you earn this 50 is no business of mine.
It's clear that the time for subtlety is over.
I will just say thank you, miss, unless you girls like to be called Ms.
Why don't you call me Mr.?
Now that's how you do an act break. When we come back from commercial, Edith's recounting the story to her son-in-law Mike.
I would never have guessed she was a man until she took his hair on.
Okay, side note, how should we talk about Beverly? The etiquette today is to identify someone however they identify themselves, and Beverly identifies herself a couple ways right off the bat.
I'm no lady. I'm a female impersonator. Why don't you call me Mr.? I'm a transvestite.
You sure fooled me. I mean, you ain't got no accent at all.
Female impersonator, transvestite, call me Mr. These give us some clues to who Beverly is because it's how she refers to herself, and she ought to know. But what does she actually mean when she uses those words? It's sometimes hard to talk about gender nonconforming people from decades past because the terms we use today are different from the terms they would have used back then. And on top of that, the definitions may vary from person to person and can even overlap. Not a lot of people use the phrase female impersonator today, but it generally refers to an entertainer, a performer who presents as a man in day-to-day life, but portrays women on stage. That's why the word impersonation is in there. The point is that they're creating an illusion of being female, usually doing an impression of a famous female star. In later episodes, we see Beverly do a Mae West impression and changing into a suit and tie before going out, so female impersonator seems to fit. But she also calls herself a transvestite. That's a term coined over 100 years ago by sex researcher Magnus Hirschfeld, and it was used to refer to a person who wears clothing associated with a different gender in their day-to-day life, or in private just for themselves. transvestite doesn't carry the same suggestion of being an entertainer as female impersonator. It's something more personal. In fact, one reason Magnus Hirschfeld created the term was so that he could issue transvestite certificates to people who were getting hassled by the police. Those cards were considered official permits for people who wanted to change their gender presentation, according to Hirschfeld, not because they were trying to create an illusion, but because those clothes affirmed their actual identity. But the word transvestite came to carry a lot of negative baggage as well, in part because it was often misused to refer to any kind of cross-dressing. Over time, we gained a better understanding of gender identity and gender presentation, and the word transgender was coined around the mid-1960s to more accurately refer to someone whose gender identity doesn't match the gender assigned to them at birth. Someone who's a transvestite puts on the clothing of a different gender, whereas someone who's transgender identifies as a different gender. But because those words were wrongly interchanged for so long, transvestite's fallen out of common usage and can be seen as pejorative. Beverly is at least invested enough in presenting as female that she never provides any name other than Beverly, never corrects anyone who uses the pronoun she, and she even serves full flawless face straight from the hospital. Did she touch up her makeup in the ambulance? Her use of the word transvestite suggests that her feminine presentation might extend beyond the stage. At the time this episode aired, you might have heard the word transsexual, or today, transgender, because we have a better understanding of the difference between sex and gender. But because transgender was a relatively new term and didn't come into common usage until the 1990s, it's unlikely people watching All in the Family would have even known what it meant. Fortunately, we have a much wider vocabulary today and are able to talk about gender in more specific terms. Someone can describe themselves as agender, or gender nonconforming, or transgender, but those terms were almost totally unknown in the 1970s, so if someone wanted to refer to themselves with more nuance, they wouldn't have had the language to do so. Not to mention, the definitions of all those terms have changed over time, both in public consciousness and on a personal level. For example, Eddie Izzard called himself a transvestite on stage in the 90s.
I'm much more in the executive transvestite area.
But in private, he'd been openly transgender since the mid-80s.
See, I am a transgender guy, did come out 31 years ago.
And he acknowledges that his own labels have shifted over the years.
Well, transvestite was a bad word. What a negative word. So I was TV. I am TV. And people said, you're television. And then the word moved to transgender and then trans. And so I said, okay, I'm transgender.
And we haven't even talked about the term drag queen, in part because it would have been unfamiliar to a lot of audiences at the time. It was common for people to use the word drag to refer to cross-dressing and queen to refer to gay men, but the two were seldom combined until around the 1950s. And even then, it was mostly confined to queer subcultures. The term didn't really come into mainstream use until the late 80s, and when this episode aired, drag queen would have elicited more confusion than the more familiar female impersonator. Edith struggles with pronouns at first.
Well, anyway, his hair came off and there she was, a man.
But Edith's also totally fine with the whole situation. Not troubled, not judgmental, bemused, but not disturbed. Archie, on the other hand, is agitated.
This freak took my breath under an assumed sex.
Oof. And it gets worse when Mike asks if Archie would have done anything different if he'd known the truth about Beverly.
I suppose I would have got a fag fireman.
Ugh, not good. Archie's not exactly coming off as a hero now. Edith tries to reassure Mike that Archie wouldn't have let a gay person die.
Mike, no, Archie wouldn't have done that because Archie is a good Christian.
Edith's faith tells her what's right and wrong, and she's clear in her belief that people like Beverly deserve to live. Archie's not so sure the Bible would agree.
It also says in the Bible that a witness shall not bear falsies against thy neighbor.
But eventually, after enough badgering, Archie admits that he'd still have saved Beverly if he knew she was, well, whatever term he wants to use for her.
Yes, all right. I would have saved the man, yes. Even if I'd have known he was a trans voice.
Thanks? Archie and Edith are essentially in agreement here. Edith's faith tells her that Beverly's life has value, and Archie begrudgingly says he would have saved her. His language is a problem, but they both recognize, in their own ways, that Beverly is a human being whose life was worth saving. Archie's still feeling conflicted, though. He knows he did something good, but he also feels ashamed about who he did it for. And down at the bar, he doesn't want anyone to know the true details.
Them people got as much right to life as anybody else.
What people?
Dying people.
Archie's discomfort here is in line with most mainstream TV attitudes of the time. Drag was rarely seen on TV and film, and when it was generally pretty awkward. There were plenty of female impersonators working in live venues throughout the 20th century, but TV and film censors were really good at keeping those performances off screen. When drag did appear, it was usually in the context of it being a trick rather than artistry. A character would be trying to fool someone. On film, Charlie Chaplin set the template in 1914's The Masquerader. A few decades later, you see two men dressing as women to hide from the mob in Some Like It Hot. And in the 1970s, Freebie and the Bean featured a super problematic gender-bending killer just a year before audiences met Beverly LaSalle. On television, things weren't much better. One of the first TV shows to regularly depict female impersonation was a 1968 series called The Ugliest Girl in Town, in which a man masqueraded as a female model in order to be close to his girlfriend. Jack dressed as a woman a few times on Three's Company for various schemes, and trickery was the whole premise of the show Bosom Buddies. It's a trope you could call deceitful drag, the idea being that a man who dresses as a woman is trying to pull off a scheme, either because they're running a con or because they're desperate. It makes drag seem like a particularly unsavory practice, and that stands in total contrast to Beverly LaSalle's approach. She's totally straightforward about who she is, introducing herself as a female impersonator, taking off her wig, and even in a later episode, objecting to a prank that involves her posing as a cis woman. That's not to say that deceit was the only reason that you'd see drag on screen. It was also common for comedians to put on dresses for comedy skits. Milton Berle did it, as did Jonathan Winters, Harvey Korman, Danny Kaye, Flip Wilson as Geraldine. There's also Monty Python too, of course, but drag in the UK is so different from the US, that's a topic for a whole different video. In contrast to drag as deceit, these characters were clearly men in dresses. And on one hand, at least they're not reinforcing the idea that dressing in drag is some kind of fraud or desperate act. They're in on the joke, having fun, not trying to pull a fast one. Their mood is often quite upbeat. Milton Berle is confident, laughing, and running circles around everyone, as is Flip Wilson as Geraldine.
What you see is what you get.
These bits are often funny because these are great comedians, but one source of the laughs is seeing a man in what the audience would have perceived as a humiliating costume. Part of the joke is how ridiculous they look, how obvious it is that they're men, how silly it is for a man to put on a dress. Beverly embodies a different kind of drag, one that was far more rare at the time on TV, and that's an empowered drag character. Beverly isn't playing a trick, or desperate, or an obvious frumpy man. She's in drag because she likes it, she's good at it, and she looks great. She's practicing drag as a craft instead of a joke. Although that was common in live venues at the time, it was pretty new to television. Over the next few years, audiences would see more characters like her in mainstream entertainment. Charles Pierce as a nightclub performer on Starsky and Hutch, Jim Bailey in the opening ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics, Divine breaking out in midnight movies with Hairspray. The term drag queen was catching on, and it perfectly fit these more powerful, extravagant, larger-than-life performers. But as fabulous as she is, Archie isn't keen to be associated with Beverly. He tries to keep the whole thing under wraps, which gets complicated when the owner of the cab company shows up with a reporter who wants to write an article about what happened. Archie's mortified, and then because this is a sitcom, you'll never guess who else drops by. Before she can say anything, Archie takes Beverly aside with a warning.
Because these guys in here, they ain't liberal thinkers. Like you and me. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think I do.
There's a lot of meaning in that warning. A person in Beverly's position would probably have understood the subtext. This is a place where she's probably not welcome. In fact, we get confirmation of that in an earlier episode when the bartender states pretty clearly he doesn't want any queer people in his bar.
I just wouldn't want my place to become no, hangout. You know what I mean? Huh?
Archie does his best to hurry her out the door, but she needs to make a pit stop.
Which way is the men's room?
Archie points her in the right direction, then looks for the reporter.
Well, where is he?
He went to the men's room.
Looks like Beverly's secret is out.
I just saw your lady friend in the men's room.
She must have made a mistake.
No way. I was a medic in the Army. There's no mistake.
And then Beverly emerges to a legitimately chilling moment. That look, that stare, a bunch of straight men in a bar who just sniffed out a queer person in their midst. The first time I saw this, I honestly thought something terrible was about to happen. In this moment, Beverly seems to realize what's happened, that her safety's in danger, as well as Archie's reputation. She thinks fast and explains what happened.
When I came to, I was being given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation by a truck driver.
Truck driver? Oh, you mean cab driver.
No, it wasn't Mr. Bunker. It was a truck driver.
Yeah.
That little lie shifts everyone's attention, and the reporter runs off to look for the non-existent truck driver. It's an amazing moment. Her quick thinking creates a clever diversion that takes the attention off of her and also pays Archie back for having saved her. Everyone quickly forgets about Beverly, bizarrely fast to be honest, but that's life in the last 60 seconds of a sitcom, and we end the episode with Archie getting a few moments alone with Beverly to express his thanks. This experience has changed them both, Beverly from an object of Archie's scorn to his savior, and Archie from a thoughtless bigot to something ever so slightly more respectful.
For a dame, you're one hell of a guy.
And that's that for the episode, but not for Beverly. She appears twice more in the show over the next 2 years, and in that time everyone's relationship with her deepens. Archie grows more comfortable around her, and she becomes particularly close with Edith.
To me, you're like a sister.
Oh, Beverly. To me, you're like a sister. No, I mean brother. Oh, well, both rolled into one.
That's another thing that sets Beverly apart. Unlike most queer guest stars who show up for one very special episode and then disappear, never to be seen again, Beverly actually comes back. Her relationship with the Bunkers changes, and she actually gets an arc, one that's ultimately, well, troubling. While Archie's eager to boast about being the one who saved Beverly's life, her intervention saves them both, all while blazing a path for future drag performers and winning the respect of TV's most iconic bigot. The episode may be called Archie the Hero, but as far as I'm concerned, all hail the Queen. Land ho, we're pulling into port. Thanks for cruising along with us, and thanks to everyone who makes Culture Cruise possible with a pledge of support on Patreon. Folks like Mama Wilson. Head over to patreon.com/MattBaum or click the link in the description to check out the rewards for backers. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see if Archie's been changed by his experience with Beverly.
She stripped me of my manhood.